The Iron Legion and the Weight of Hate. The Fourth Legion was forged for one purpose above all others: the reduction of fortifications. Where other legions won glory in open battle or precision strikes, Perturabo's sons were built for the slow, grinding work of siege warfare. They dug the trenches and absorbed the counter-battery fire while other legions received the praise. And for all of that, they received neither the accolades nor the resources afforded to their peers. The Emperor deployed them wherever the fighting was ugliest and the casualties highest, and then moved on to more glamorous theaters of war without so much as a word of thanks. Perturabo noticed. He catalogued every slight, every campaign for which another legion received the laurels while his sons filled the mass graves. He built an interior architecture of resentment so vast and so precisely ordered that when Horus came to him with the offer of rebellion, it was not a difficult decision. The Fourth Legion turned against the Imperium with the same cold ferocity it had always brought to breaking fortified walls, except now the fortress they were tearing down was the civilization they had helped build. They fought at the Siege of Terra. They stood in the trenches outside the walls of the Imperial Palace and directed the most sophisticated orbital and surface bombardment in human history against the greatest fortification humanity had ever constructed. They came very close to winning, and then Horus died, and the warp took the traitor legions, and the Iron Warriors fled through the Eye of Terror to plan and brood and hate. 10,000 years passed, more in some reckonings, given that time inside the Eye of Terror does not behave like time in the material universe. The Long War lost its shape as a campaign and became a permanent condition of existence, a war that had eaten its own objectives so completely that the original purpose barely mattered anymore. Many Iron Warriors who remember Terra have calcified into something brilliant but brittle, capable of extraordinary tactical insight but corroded at the core by a stagnation that centuries in the warp will eventually inflict on even the most disciplined mind. Perturabo, elevated to Demon Primarch, looks on his legion with contempt. He has always looked on them with contempt. Once that contempt was the cold assessment of a commander who knows his tools are imperfect. Now it is the scorn of a being who has transcended his origins and finds the company of his former brothers almost beneath acknowledgement. He deploys them because they are useful, and he watches them the way a master craftsman watches an apprentice who has learned just enough to be dangerous to himself. The Newcomer and the Long War Veterans. Mourn was not born into the Fourth Legion. He was taken. The Iron Warriors have always supplemented their ranks with warriors pressed or recruited from the mortal armies, and warbands that orbit the Legion's operations, and with Chaos Space Marines drawn from other warbands who have found their way to Medrengard or encountered an Iron Warrior's force in the field. The process is rarely gentle. Warriors who show promise are absorbed. Those who do not are discarded, often in ways that serve as object lessons to anyone else considering insufficient enthusiasm for the role. Kravek Morne was forced into the Iron Warrior's service somewhere in the 39th millennium. The precise circumstances are not recorded in any source that has reached Imperial scholars. Whether he was a renegade space marine already turned to chaos, a warlord whose independent operations happened to intersect with the Fourth Legion's interests, or something else entirely, the record does not say. Morne entered the Legion's service approximately 2,000 standard years before the opening of the Great Rift, and he did so without any of the institutional history that distinguishes the Long War veterans. He had not fought at Terra. He carried none of the ancient hatreds carefully cultivated over 100 centuries of bitter, grinding warfare against an Imperium that had refused to fall. He arrived without that weight. In the Iron Warriors, where every veteran of Terra treats that experience as a badge of supreme authority, that absence should have closed every door above him. It opened them instead. Within 500 standard years of his forced induction, a span of time that outside the Eye of Terror would encompass the rise and fall of entire planetary civilizations, Morne had risen to the rank of Warsmith. In an organization where advancement is measured in the brutal mathematics of survival and consistent tactical success, that is an extraordinary achievement. 5 centuries is not a short time, but it is short by the standards of an institution whose senior leadership fought beside Perturabo in person and still measure their authority in millennia. The gift that earned Morne his rank was the capacity for devastating headlong assault, rawer and more direct than the methodical siegecraft at which the Legion excels. The ability to identify the point at which a defensive line is critically vulnerable, and then drive through it at speed before the defender can react or recover. This is a different thing from recklessness. Recklessness gets Chaos Space Marines killed in satisfying numbers, and it impresses nobody in a legion that has been studying the geometry of fortifications for 10,000 years. Mourne's gift was something more precise, knowing exactly where to strike and how hard, then committing to that strike without hesitation or overcomplexity. The Long War veterans retained the skill in principle. Alongside it, they had accumulated enough institutional caution, enough scar tissue from 10 millennia of campaigns, that their decision-making had slowed. They had seen too many frontal assaults fail to trust frontal assaults. They had developed the veteran's reflex for elaboration, adding another gun or another phase before committing, at the cost of the momentum that makes assault viable in the first place. Mourne had not been in the Long War long enough to acquire that calcification. He was still, in the cold parlance of military assessment, operationally hungry. What Perturabo does not give lightly. Perturabo's trust is not a thing handed out. It is extracted from commanders who have demonstrated value through a sustained record of results over a period long enough that chance cannot explain it. Luck runs out. Talent, properly applied, compounds. Mourne's record of victories over the 1,500 years since his elevation to Warsmith has been consistent enough that even Perturabo, who views the entire senior leadership of the Iron Warriors as a collection of better-than-average tools, has placed Mourne in the small and rarefied category of officers whose judgment he will act on. The cold acknowledgement that this particular instrument has not yet failed him is the closest thing to confidence Perturabo extends. Within the Iron Warriors' command structure, that distinction matters enormously. The Legion is an autocracy in which all authority flows from Perturabo, and the Demon Primarch's favor is the only currency that actually counts. Warsmiths who hold his trust receive resources and operational latitude. Those who do not find themselves operating on the margins, receiving the missions that Perturabo calculates, will either solve a problem or eliminate an officer who has become more liability than asset. Mourne's standing is a product of calculation rather than favor. In an organization defined by the contempt of its own Primarch, a commander who costs more to remove than to keep occupies ground that is, if not safe, at least stable. The Long War veterans resent his rise, and the quality that enabled it is exactly the quality they have lost. Mourne carries neither their arrogance nor their lethargy. The survivors of Terra have had 10,000 years to develop a sense of their own historical significance. They were there. They fought in the most consequential military engagement in human history. That experience is extraordinary, and many of them have never managed to get past it. The war became their identity so completely that everything since has been a shadow of what they remember. Mourne arrived after that defining moment and had to build his reputation on what he actually accomplished rather than where he was standing when Sanguinius died. By the standards of his legion, he is still hungry. The Iron Mantle. The armor defines the man in ways that go beyond the symbolic. Mourne wears Cataphracti Terminator armor, an original suit from the Horus Heresy era, rather than a modern reconstruction or a Forge World salvage. He calls it the Iron Mantle. Cataphracti pattern Terminator armor was the most heavily protected of the standard tactical dreadnought armor patterns available to the Space Marine legions during the Great Crusade and the Horus Heresy. Its layered ceramite and powered exoskeleton were engineered to a standard that the Adeptus Mechanicus of the 41st Millennium can study and partially replicate but cannot entirely reproduce. The knowledge to manufacture these suits at their original specification has been lost, scattered across Forge World archives in fragmentary and contradictory forms. The suits that survive from that period are irreplaceable. Mourne has rebuilt the Iron Mantle around himself entirely. Long years of fighting in the deadliest frontal assaults imaginable have turned the armor into something that barely resembles its original configuration. It bristles with mecha tendrils, mechanical extensions slaved to the suit's mind impulse unit, responding to Mourne's neurological commands as extensions of his own body rather than as separate tools. They are weaponized. The augmetics threaded through the suit and through Mourne's body are, at this point, so thoroughly integrated that the distinction between the man and the machine has become largely academic. The Iron Mantle has consumed and rebuilt him as thoroughly as he has rebuilt it. The Legion has always gravitated toward mechanical augmentation above the other varieties of chaos transformation. favoring the cold utilitarian logic of iron and gear over the flesh consumption of Nurgle's followers or the cornate bloodlust of the World Eaters. Iron warriors who pursue that logic far enough eventually become something that is more fortress than warrior, moving points of structural resistance built around a core of will and muscle that the machinery serves and amplifies. Mourn has gone further than most. On the battlefield, he is as durable as the heavy armor he commands. Last argument. Among everything that bristles from the Iron Mantle, the most lethal is the thunder hammer Mourn carries. He calls it Last Argument. The name is a piece of dark philosophy expressed as nomenclature. A weapon that crackles with infernal power does not invite discussion or negotiation. Its entire purpose is the terminal resolution of a conflict. Last Argument carries no storied lineage of honorable duels. It is a siege weapon reduced to hand scale, and when Mourn brings it down, the conversation is over. Thunder hammers release a massive disruption pulse on impact, the concussive force of the blow combining with that discharge to produce an effect that exceeds either component alone. Against infantry, the disruption tears through nervous systems and overwhelms the systems of even the heaviest battle plate. Against armored constructs and fortifications, it shatters metal and fractures ceramic bonding, introducing vibrations that propagate through the target structure in ways that conventional force cannot replicate. A thunder hammer wielded by an ordinary space marine is a devastating weapon. In the hands of a warrior clad in Heresy-era Terminator armor and driven by the full strength of the armor's exoskeletal systems, it is something closer to a portable siege engine. Last Argument is Mourn's personally crafted variant. The infernal power with which it crackles suggests modification beyond standard construction. The warp, which suffuses everything that has spent significant time near the Eye of Terror, leaves its mark on weapons as surely as it leaves its mark on minds. Last Argument has absorbed enough ambient chaos energy over Mourn's centuries of service to have qualities that a tech priest would struggle to fully measure or explain. Last Argument falls outside the formal category of demon weapon. No bound entity gives it consciousness or independent will, but it is no longer entirely an artifact of the material universe either. The rest of the arsenal. A warsmith of Mourn's stature does not walk into battle carrying only a hammer. The shoulder-mounted Baleflamer addresses a specific tactical problem that any assault specialist encounters: defenders who retreat into cover that a melee weapon cannot reach. Walls that are still standing have interiors. Trenches have traverses and bunkers. The Baleflamer removes the cover as an option. Balefire consumes in ways that bypass conventional combustion physics, adhering to surfaces and generating heat that conventional armor manages poorly. Enemies who attempt to use structures or terrain as refuge from Mourn's assault find that the structures themselves become weapons deployed against them. The Combi Bolter provides fire suppression during the approach to contact, keeping enemy heads down while the Iron Warriors close distance. The servo harness integrated into the Iron Mantle extends Mourn's mechanical capabilities further, providing additional tool arms and augmentation that serve both battlefield and logistical functions. The Power Fist generates a disruptive energy field that allows it to tear through heavy armor and structural materials, giving Mourn a secondary melee option for situations where the arc of Last Argument is not ideal. Everything Mourn carries is optimized for the first 100 meters of an assault, where the fortifications have been reduced to rubble and the surviving defenders have to be killed at arm's length in the dust. A commander who fights from the rear carries different tools. The Obliterators and the Will to Dominate. The clearest measure of Mourn's authority over the Legion is not his rank, it is what he is able to command. Obliterators are among the most disturbing products of the Long War. The Obliterator virus consumes Chaos Space Marines so thoroughly that they fuse with their weapons at the cellular level. Their bodies become a constantly shifting amalgam of flesh and metal, capable of absorbing and generating weapons of extraordinary variety and power. They are devastating on the battlefield, and by any conventional measure, insane. The process of becoming an Obliterator does not preserve the mind. The thing that emerges recognizes friend from foe in a functional sense and can direct its terrible weapon mass with enough tactical awareness to be useful. But it is not the warrior who entered the transformation. The Obliterator virus is an engine of profound mental destruction. The beings that emerge cannot be reasoned with and cannot be reliably controlled through anything other than raw dominance. Mourn commands them. His will is powerful enough to impose control over even these shattered minds, directing them as instruments in his assaults rather than allowing them to operate as the barely aimed projectiles they become under weaker leadership. This is not a trivial capability. Many Iron Warriors officers work around Obliterators rather than with them, deploying them at the edges of operations where their lack of fine control is less damaging to the overall tactical picture. Mourn deploys them as deliberate instruments, which means he can concentrate their firepower in ways that make them qualitatively more dangerous than the same number of Obliterators under a less dominant commander. The same dominance extends to Mutilators, the close combat equivalent of Obliterators, warriors whose bodies have been consumed and reshaped around a different set of martial imperatives. Mutilators are shock assault troops, heavily mutated and armed with weapons that shift and reform from their own flesh. Their effectiveness is similarly constrained by the damage the transformation has inflicted on their cognition. Mourn leads them directly into the breach, using his dominance over their fractured minds to place them exactly where the assault needs them most. The assault pattern is blunt by design. Iron Warriors advance under disciplined fire while Obliterators concentrate their weapon mass where resistance is thickest. Mutilators drive into close combat at the moment of structural breach, with Mourn himself at the front, the Iron Mantle and last argument aimed at whatever the enemy has put forward to stop him. The method is the point. The campaign in the era Indomitus. The fall of Cadia during Abaddon's 13th Black Crusade shattered the anchor that had held the Cadian Gate for 10,000 years. The loss tore the Great Rift across the galaxy, splitting Imperium Sanctus from Imperium Nihilus in ways no previous Black Crusade had managed. By any measure, it was a catastrophe for the Imperium. But Cadia's fall did not deliver the Cadian Gate. The region is not a single world but a volume of space, a strategic corridor connecting the Eye of Terror to the rest of the galaxy, and many of the bastions that held it survived. Imperial forge worlds and fortified remnants still cling to that corridor with the stubborn persistence of defenders who have nowhere left to retreat to. Agripinaa, the mighty forge world that anchors the gate's industrial capacity, has held. While those positions stand, chaos cannot truly begin a sustained march toward Terra. The corridor remains contested, and the contest matters. Perturabo has understood this for millennia. The plan formulated across thousands of years in the spires of Medrengard does not terminate at the Cadian Gate. The gate is the starting point. Perturabo's design is the infinite Citadel, an expanding ring of fortifications that converts captured worlds into keeps, consuming their resources to raise walls that cross entire systems, creeping toward Terra, battle by battle, leaving nothing behind that might disrupt the advance. It is a classic Iron Warrior siege, applied to the scale of the galaxy itself. The campaign task to Kravek Morne is the opening move. Its name, coined in the cold utilitarian language of Iron Warrior's operational doctrine, is the Reign of Iron. Deep within the spires of Medrengard, the Iron Warriors have been preparing this assault for longer than most mortal civilizations endure. Morn commands the vanguard, mortal and demonic hosts backed by the full weight of the 4th Legion's siege expertise, directed at the surviving Imperial worlds of the Cadian Gate with the specific objective of bringing every one of them into the infinite Citadel's expanding ring. Agripinaa is the centerpiece. A forge world of that scale produces military materiel at a rate that keeps the other surviving bastions operational. Weapons, armor, voidcraft, Titan support. Take Agripinaa, and the remaining Imperial positions in the gate begin to starve. They can be reduced at leisure. The corridor clears. The path opens. Morn advances. Walls break. The character beneath the iron. Morn is, by the standards of the Iron Warriors, callous and brutal. Those are accurate descriptions of a leadership style optimized for siege assault. Callousness is a functional quality in a commander whose operations reliably produce high casualty rates on both sides of a wall. Brutality is the mechanism by which an officer of the Long War maintains authority over warriors who have spent centuries developing their own capacity for violence and their own contempt for weakness. Callousness and brutality are common enough in the 4th Legion. Every warsmith the Long War has produced carries those qualities in quantity. The rarer thing, the thing that actually explains Morn's rise and his continued value to Perturabo, is an absence. No arrogance inherited from Terra, no lethargy accumulated over 10,000 years of a war that has been losing its shape since Horus fell. The Long War veterans carry both. Mourn carries neither. The history he never experienced is a weight he was never required to bear. In a legion of survivors and grudge-bearers, that makes Mourn a rarity. A Chaos Space Marine who is still, in any operational sense, functional. He has not been consumed by the Long War to the point where the war itself has become more important than winning it. He still cares about outcomes and remains capable of the clean, unsentimental assessment of tactical reality that produces results. Perturabo extends his trust on a cold calculation of value, withdrawing it the moment that calculation changes. Mourn has held it for 1,500 years. Behind that number is a commander who has understood exactly what the Iron Warriors are for, and who has never once allowed himself to forget it. He is a siege weapon. He has made himself into one, in iron and flesh and centuries of directed violence. And in the era Indomitus, with the great rift yawning across the galaxy and the Imperium fracturing under pressures it may not survive, Perturabo has pointed that weapon at the stars. The walls will fall, they always do.